Hi, Heather. Hi, Hanson. Morning, Frank. How are
Oh
you?
yeah, Heather, how are you doing?
Doing well.
Good.
Took a long weekend off and I didn't look at my computer for 3 days and it was just fantastic. I don't ever do that.
I was gonna say that sounds really unusual for you, Heather.
I'm learning. We still have people joining quickly here. Enrique, it's so good to see you again.
Hola, Heather, how are you? Great to
Hola,
see
it's
you.
cool. Great to see you. Haven't seen
Yes.
you at OCP in a while.
Yes, I should pay you a visit.
We would love
Maybe,
that.
maybe next year.
We've got some good session discussions going on, so it'll be great. All right, well, I'm going to say a few words first. And so I'm going to just let people join. And if they miss what I'm saying, that's okay. So for those who don't know me, my name is Heather Benway. I'm a senior research specialist at WHOI. I'm an oceanographer. I have been managing the Ocean Carbon and Biogeochemistry, or OCB, project office since 2007. And one of the things I'm most passionate about in this role is the role of sustained ship-based ocean time series and how much of a cornerstone they are for oceanographic research, and really having that baseline understanding of marine ecosystem function and how marine ecosystems are changing. And so as an OCB project officer, one of the things that we've done a lot of is coordinate time series activities, coordinating science across international time series, coordinating methods, trying to get on the same page with common methods across time series. And there's enormous power in this. And I wanted to just share a couple of slides today to just talk about how valuable it is for us to develop a network of these sustained time series efforts so that we can really get on the same page with the methods, with the data practices, so that we can use these data sets across time series and do synthetic science. And the Ocean Best Practices Workshop is a great opportunity here to talk about one of the efforts we're involved in now, which is focused on data best practices. So I wanted to just share a couple slides. You all have read the description for this session, obviously, because you're here. You wouldn't have gotten here if you hadn't read it. Just a few words about an effort that I'm involved in right now, which is focused on the data best practices. So there is a globally distributed network of ship-based ocean time series, and it is incredibly valuable. It's both coastal and open ocean time series, including physical, biogeochemical, and biological variables, which that's really powerful to have all of those variables together being collected at the same time. And I think there's a real movement now as we think about what our observing systems will look like in the next decade, to try to leverage the infrastructure that we have in place now and make sure that we're making the best of each and every piece of infrastructure we have out there to collect these really comprehensive data sets. So you can see all of the types of measurements that most of the ship-based time series are making. Obviously, there's variability between different time series, but biology and biodiversity, biomass. I mean, this session here is really focused on these biological variables because not as much has been done in terms of both the methods and the data best practices. There aren't a lot of standards in place for these variables. And so I really wanted to have you all here as representatives of other observing networks who are also thinking about biology and biodiversity, so that we're all working on the same things and having these discussions, and we're not all working in a vacuum, establishing separate sets of standards and best practices for these core biological variables. Over a decade of international coordination on this, I have worked with so many different amazing partners, including the International Ocean Carbon Coordination Project, IOC UNESCO, all of the individual time series. And like I said, we're focusing on science. We're looking at sampling and methodologies across these different time series. There's some enormous efforts that I'm not leading, but have contributed to on statistical trend analysis across time series around the world. And now I'm really focused on the FAIR data best practices. So these are just a couple of, examples of, you've got atmospheric and oceanographic time series here looking at CO2 trends and pH trends in the ocean. This is from the Hawaii Ocean Time Series study and the Mauna Loa CO2 monitoring that's been happening. And you can see the trends being mirrored. The green line is the ocean PCO2 at the surface, and the red line is the rising CO2 levels in the atmosphere. And then you can see the pH being monitored from the same location, and that's the line in the curve in blue showing this decline. And this is an amazing study. I think Nick Bates was the first one who did this, and then Tosta Tanua built on this, and this is looking at CO2 ocean PCO2 trends across globally distributed time series, and you can see the rise. This is a global trend. This isn't just happening in one location. And then efforts led by Todd O'Brien to conduct statistical analyses and look at trends in chlorophyll, temperature, and looking at biomass at different time series sites around the globe, and against the backdrop of synoptic, let's get satellite picture of temperature and chlorophyll. So there's enormous efforts that have gone on to try to pull time series together to be able to look at changes in our ocean. And like I said, so many different partners, global partners involved in trying to do this stuff. A decade ago, we had a workshop focused on methods, like how are you collecting your samples and what order are you sampling? What methods are you using to do productivity, primary productivity rate measurements? Then the statistical trend analysis that I just showed you by O'Brien et al. This was the International Group for Marine Ecological Time Series. We've done a lot of feature articles and visionary type documents, and thinking about all of these different parts of this immensely valuable global observing network. Just thinking about the different facets of that, and data is the one that has recently been at the forefront, focusing on this idea of FAIR data, data best practices, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. That is what FAIR stands for. I'm sure you all know that because you're here, but we had a very small workshop, only about 30 people, at the last global Ocean OBS meeting in Hawaii. And it was kind of a fact-finding mission. Like, let's do a gap analysis and see where we are on these ocean time series, and who's got what for data best practices, and who are using these data sets, who's the audience here. And it was a really valuable experience. We spent 2.5 days in a room together. Obviously, we weren't going to solve the FAIR data problem in 2.5 days, but what it did lead to was a proposal to the National Science Foundation to get funding for a more sustained effort to really delve into a community of experts, data managers, data scientists, really getting into the semantics and thinking about, the use of controlled vocabularies, and thinking about establishing some best practices for these ocean time series. And that is how we got this research coordination network funded for marine ecological time series. And that's what METS RCN stands for. And we were partnering, it just so happens that we were partnering with this group who have, this is a Geomar-led project funded by EuroSea. They're trying to build a time series data product, kind of in a style similar to GLODAP, kind of just being able to develop a product, almost like the global carbon budget, where you can develop a time series data product that's a kind of a synthetic biogeochemical data product that could kind of be like a report card for the oceans every year. We have this synthetic analysis of trends in the ocean, but that's really difficult. And this has been a good test, like a use case for us to kind of see the challenges that this group is having and trying to pull these data sets together. And even just looking at different units, I mean, it's very challenging to be able to conduct this type of synthesis across these time series data sets. So just a couple things about the METS RCN. This is really devising fair METS data practices is our primary aim here. And we have established a data working group. And we recently, in the last 6 months, started exploring the use of controlled vocabularies and different semantic approaches for different sets of variables, like those variables I showed you a couple slides ago. And trying to think about, what's the minimum amount of metadata information we need in order to take these time series data and compare them to those time series data. So that has been really the focus of what we've been doing. And when we started doing this, especially for the biological data, we really wanted to get the perspective of other observing networks like MBON and all of the ones that you saw here in this session description that I put out there, because we don't want to do this in a vacuum. Like, we should all be striving for the same goal here. So that's what this session is all about. We saw the Ocean Best Practices workshop as a real opportunity to gather forces and all talk together about what challenges, who are our different audiences, what are the vocabularies and semantic approaches that we know about that we're trying to leverage, what are the issues, and let's all kind of strive for the same goal. So that's what this is really about. We are also, in doing this, we think that there's enormous potential to broaden the users for these data. If we can make these data more interoperable across different time series, we can broaden the users of these data. And that's one of the goals later on down the line. We'd like to have regional stakeholders networks. Maybe we start with 1 or 2 pilot networks where we can get these data being used more broadly, not just for science or research, but educational purposes, getting more modelers being able to use time series data sets, which, having standardized best practices for the data themselves would be a huge step forward, and modelers being able to extract these data and use them. Also managers, there are plenty of, especially for a lot of the coastal time series, there are plenty of coastal challenges that we're facing in our coastlines that these time series data sets would be an enormous resource to inform management and policy. And we're also trying to build the capacity, because we all know that, this intersection of data science and oceanography is huge, and it's exploding, and there's so much power in building the data analysis. And so that's one of the real goals for us, is to have some sort of a hackathon at the end to just kind of convey some of the statistical knowledge and the data analysis capacity that's needed as we push forward. So that is what that's about. You can go to the website if you want to learn more about the METS RCN. I'm happy to talk about that, but I just wanted to share a little bit of what we're doing, and then I'm excited to hear from others. So that's what today's session is about. There are steering committee members, and we've included representation from ocean sites, MBON, a number of these that you see here, but a couple of them are also additional, the ESIP clusters. So I've been attending those meetings and just trying to learn about what these groups are doing. GOOS has a bioeco efforts that they're trying to, they already have, they have a set of core variables, and everybody's going through this right now for biological observations. And so we just all wanted to talk with you and get your assessment of, I have some discussion topics here, what are your key bioeco variables? What are the existing data infrastructure that you're looking at? Are there controlled vocabularies that exist or that you want to invent? Who are your target users? Who are using your data sets now? Are there data formats and vocabularies that best serve your users, and how do you build consensus? Because this is our next step. I talked about this idea of, 10 years ago, we had a big international time series workshop focused on methods. And next year, I want to have the same workshop with different time series coming to the table. And we talk about the data part of this. And that's why we have this data working group now as part of this METS RCN. They're starting to come up with recommendations. And so we could vet those recommendations at a larger international workshop like this. But we also wanted to have this opportunity, use this platform to talk with other observing networks about how they're managing these issues. So I have invited folks from all of these different networks that you see listed here. And I'm excited to have them all here. I'm going to ask people to come on one at a time and just share. If you want to share your slides, you're free to do that. If you want to just speak, you're free to do that, but just introduce yourself and kind of touch on these discussion topics that I've listed here. And then I'd like to just open it up for questions, discussion, just all of us talking together and thinking about, how can we stay connected with each other as all of our efforts move forward. So I'm trying to see who is up first here. So I've already spoken. METS RCN is done. I would be happy to introduce, I know I have a lot of steering committee members here, but most of you are going to get a chance to speak on this meeting. So I'm going to invite MBON, the Marine Biodiversity Observing Network, to speak first. And Enrique, are you going to be the spokesperson for MBON? Many of you are so involved in multiple different efforts, so.
Well, I'd be happy. Thank you, Heather. Thank you for the introduction. That was really interesting. But anyhow, unfortunately I'm working from my NOAA office, and NOAA does not like Zoom, so I'm connecting from my phone. So I may break up occasionally. I'd be happy to initiate the conversation and then perhaps hand it over to Frank and Gabrielle, who are also very familiar, well, of course, leading many of the MBON activities. But anyhow, I'm very glad to see that, many people that are joining this call are people that we talk to very often. You see Raisa, Matt Biddle here, Abby, Pierluigi, everybody, and in a way where we're working on different fronts on how to make data follow fair principles and make sure that people adopt some standards so that data can really become interoperable. And this is something that we're doing on the data science side of things, but we're also tackling this challenge from the capacity building perspective. Running workshops, international workshops, some of them for people to understand the different data vocabularies and standards, things like the Darwin core schema that we're really promoting together with OBPS, so that people publish taxonomic observations on the ocean biodiversity information system in a way that is consistent and that can be, if you're looking at taxonomic observations around the world, you are able to extract metadata in a way that makes sense to you, that it helps your science, but also helps you develop products that can inform management, which is ultimately, in my view, what the science needs to be thinking about. How do we make sure that the information that we're collecting is actually going to support decision making across the world? And so, but this is can only be done through these conversations that you're promoting. And it can only be done by having the right infrastructure in place, which in the case of the type of observations that we're focusing on, which is biodiversity, I think there is a lot of progress in that front through OBPS. And these can only also be done through making sure that people gain the skills needed to understand these data schemas. These are things that are not intuitive for most of us. We're not trained on data science, so this requires training, and this requires dedicating resources to making sure that people apply techniques, use resources that are out there, are aware of the resources that are out there for transforming data sets into, for example, Darwin Core and maybe other schemas. But hopefully this what I'm just saying right now helps trigger some conversations within this group.
I can follow up, Heather, a little bit on building the idea of what MBON is all about, and then maybe jump to Marine Life 2030, which is also on your list. And I don't want to take too long, because you basically already laid the philosophy of what we're all trying to do is, and it's a network of people. MBON is a network. There are some funded projects in the US now, just announced a couple of weeks ago. Through an interagency process, there were 5 new projects selected for the next 5 years. And so that's an important platform that we can build on, and they're distributed around the country from Florida all the way to Alaska and on both coasts. Internationally, there is also the Europeans are investing a lot of money in MBON, and so they're going to announce, if they haven't already, at least a couple very large projects. And then they're also investing in digital twins that are focused on marine biodiversity, also linked to MBON. And so MBON has these dimensions. At the international level, it's managed out of the Air Center in the Azores, and they're gracious enough to sponsor a secretariat. And there's that's the main secretariat. There's another secretariat in Japan that deals with the Asia Pacific region, and in the US that is the Integrated Ocean Observing System, and Gabrielle basically functions as the US secretariat. And so we try to communicate between these different projects in the US along the same lines that you discussed, as how do you advance common methods, or at least interoperable methods for biodiversity. But the one distinction with MBON is that it's intended to point to operations, so to collect data in a way that you can support decisions by managers at the state level or at the federal level, or even at the international level. So way beyond science is having a practical application. So we are meeting. We would like to join you in and there are in fact a type of time series. Every one of these programs is looking at collections within a region of the US or more broadly. We use everything from in situ sensors to satellite data sets. So there's a very strong remote sensing component. There's a very strong omics component, and that links to all of the groups are collecting eDNA data, at least, if not other types of data. And they're also involved in some of the Ocean Decade programs through programs like the Ocean Biomolecular Observing Network, or OBON. So that to try to organize things better, we link up with, at the MBON level, it's under the umbrella of the Group on Earth Observations, or GEO. And we work closely, as Enrique said, with groups or projects under the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, or the IOC, like OBPS and the Global Ocean Observing System that you mentioned before. They try to come up with the definitions and criteria for essential ocean variables. And on the GEO side, the Group on Earth Observations Biodiversity Observation Network, where MBON lives, they try to come up with essential biodiversity variables. And so how do you apply these things? How do you construct them? What are some standards and formats and data collection process? All of this led to thinking, well, we need to really promote this more broadly, just like you're trying to do. And the Ocean Decade came along as an opportunity to push the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly the Sustainable Development Goal 14, that was proposed in 2017 and took a couple years. It was finally implemented in 2021, and they made a call for programs. These are kind of overarching actions for the decade that are intended to be global, long-term, involve a lot of people, and basically develop networks of networks to address challenges for the decade. And so we proposed Marine Life 2030 as exactly with the principles of MBON, but to try to bring in this multidisciplinary networking into the discussion, including social sciences. OBON is another one. So they proposed this to focus on eDNA and multiomics. And so there's others, Supreme, the Ocean Best Practices. There's some that deal with deep ocean, and we're all trying to talk to each other. So I think that one of the challenges, Heather, is how do we continue this conversation without running ourselves into the ground, because there's many groups trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to take advantage of the visibility of the decade, and yet if we're judicious and systematic about it, we can all build in the same direction, which is really what we want. And so I really want to join you in the research coordination network and use each other networks so that we build a robust thing here.
Thank you, Frank and Enrique. That was really, really helpful. And I'm so glad I'm recording this because I can't possibly type fast enough. This is such great information. And Gabrielle, thank you for posting these links in the chat. I'm seeing lots of great things coming up in the chat. So we're definitely going to save all this. We're going to make the recording available. Does anyone have any questions about MBON before we move to the next network? If you think of something after too, that's fine. We're going to open it all up for questions.
Well, one point, which is kind of the elephant in the room, is that a lot of this is done by passion and volunteering. And so just like you're doing, we need people to really step up and engage into some activity. If you want to lead a workshop on something, on either eDNA or how do you measure biodiversity using any number, acoustics or whatever. We have working groups that need these types of people that are really passionate about doing something, about modeling. We want all of this points toward, can you predict life and forecast it in some way? So to the extent that people here can engage with us and volunteer for an activity, which can be whatever you want, and how do you link it to people that need this information? So that's the co-design piece. That would be very useful.
Thank you, Frank and Enrique. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I would like to shift gears and move us to the Earth System Information Partners, either the marine or bio cluster. I know Abby is here for the bio cluster, but Matthew is also here from the marine cluster. Matthew, why don't you go and then Abby can go? How's that?
Yeah, that sounds great. And I think this is a great transition as to what Frank was talking about getting volunteers together to get everybody collaborated. And that's really what ESIP, the foundation of ESIP is, the Earth Science Information Partners. And it's really a community of organizations and volunteers that come together to try to address data challenges, environmental data challenges, and try to expand, improve on standards, innovate across all the different earth science disciplines. And so as part of ESIP, I am a co-chair of the Marine Data Cluster. And the role of that cluster is to bring together ESIP members that are working on different parts of the data and sorry, I just forgot the word that I was looking for, but on different parts of the data and the management pieces that are in different disciplines. And we try to bring them in and see how those different disciplines can bleed into the marine science domain. And so while we have a focus on marine science, marine geoscience, we really want to try to learn from other collaboration areas and try to bring in their knowledge and their understanding into what we're trying to do for the marine community. We try to look at critical areas in informatics. So it's really, this is getting into the weeds of data management. So this is like, in some cases, we're pulling up XML files and looking through and trying to really, this is like the hardcore informatics sessions that that we have. And so one of the previous ESIP winter meetings, Heather, I believe you were there to present, we had a couple of innovative topics. And so what we're trying to do is bring in some of these new advancements, and we're trying to share it with the broader informatics community. So we had presentations about omics and how, what the current understanding is and recommendations are for organizing and sharing omics data. We also had some information about like imagery through IFCBs, which we're starting to see a lot of good crossover and a lot of good collaboration there. So the ESIP network is really intended to be a collaboration space where we can come in and we can learn about these new innovations, and we can start kind of spitballing off of ideas and see where could we take this thing that wasn't intended for what we're using it for and make it work for us, and expand that to be more inclusive of everything. So we do this through, there's biannual meetings, there's a summer and a winter one where we get together, and then there's also monthly teleconferences. And the Marine Data Cluster is structured in a way where 1 month we have kind of a show and tell session where people can come in and talk about recent advancements, tools. We had a really interesting session about Xarray, which is a Python package, and there's all these different variants of it. And so we had all the different authors of those variants of the package come in and talk about them and what the differences and the nuances are between all of those. So it's a way to learn about new tools and techniques and technologies. And then we'll also have a more dedicated session for the last year where we started looking at controlled vocabularies. And the goal of what we wanted to do was to provide a simple decision tree for a marine data manager to decide on what vocabulary they should be using when they share their data. How do we pick a vocabulary that ensures our data is interoperable and it's discoverable and meets all of the fair tenets? It turns out that's a really difficult question to answer, and that's what we learned. And so it was a good process to go through and explore all the different vocabularies and to see the different perspectives that came in. So we had people that were coming in from the from like the wildfire cluster and talking about their approaches with vocabularies. And so we got a lot of good collaboration there. It turned out that we essentially ended the whole effort with a list of resources and some bare bones guidelines on picking vocabularies. So I don't know if that would be helpful to this group, but it was kind of that through all of that work that we did, we kind of had to step back and said, okay, decision tree isn't really possible with all the different variables that are involved with deciding on what vocabulary you want, but at least having a consolidated list of the vocabularies that we heard about and kind of the decision process that some people walk through was would be useful. And so really the ESIP cluster, it's open, everybody's invited to come. Hopefully I can throw a link to the cluster page in the chat. And it's really a great space to have that collaborative conversation to discuss with really a lot of really smart people in informatics and kind of see where we can go. So I open that for a spot for having those conversations. And I think I'll end it with that.
Thank you so much, Matt. And I know that Abby is going to only add to and build on this. I see somebody's put a link to the biological data standards primer, which you should all definitely look at. I mean, having been through this process, we are kind of watching and learning from these other groups who've already kind of started broaching this. You know, we've just had some small group meetings just looking at what's out there already, and in some cases there isn't much, but I think this is a really valuable piece for us to learn. You know, this interface between ocean science and data science and informatics is absolutely critical. And what you guys are doing is a fantastic model. I'm going to turn it over to Abby now. Go for it, Abby. And thank you for joining us. I know you're just coming off travel hangover, time zone craziness.
Yes, so please excuse me if I get a little spacey here, but thanks for having me, and I'm glad I could make it. So, and I'm really happy that Matt started off, because I would have completely forgotten to explain what ESIP is. So Matt did that for me, so thanks, Matt. So the Biological Data Standards Cluster is a different cluster than the Marine Cluster with ESIP. And the goal for this cluster is to maximize data relevance and utility for understanding changes in biodiversity over time. It came out of a workshop, so that's kind of where the cluster got its start. And what we found in the workshop was that people really just didn't know that there were standards for biological data already. And so one thing we've really been focusing on is trying to kind of spread the word and let people know that there are standards that exist for biological data. And that's where the primer, which Frank posted link, thanks Frank, to the primer. So that's where we started. We built the primer, which is intended to just be like a quick TDLR, you know, just trying to get a quick sense of what standards are out there for biological observation data. So that's out there. Feel free to reuse it, share it with your groups. And then now we're starting to, we'll begin at our next monthly meeting to look at writing best practices associated with that primer, because what we found is while the primer is a good, quick, you know, just inference, you know, to know, okay, here are the standards, it doesn't actually help you pick which standard you should use for the data that you have. And so we're going to start writing some best practice documents that will go into the, we hope, into the OBPS system. We have the goals of increasing awareness and interest in standards for biological data, create unity and shared vision around biological data standards implementation, and provide guidance. To provide opportunities for knowledge sharing and coordination, and then provide connectivity across ESIP. So that's kind of what we're working on over the next year. If you're interested to join us, I'll pop a link in the chat for our wiki. And yeah, I think that's probably a good summary of where we're at with that cluster. So.
Thank you both so much. Does anyone have any questions? I think the link to the primer is in the chat, and I highly recommend you visit that and just download that to have as a reference. I know it's a really helpful tool. It's kind of like, it is like a decision support tool. Like, this is how you should go about.
I have a question for you, Heather, and Abby, perhaps, is how do you walk this out at a broader international level? Because even at this point, at least this biological data standards group is very focused, or has the participation is very US based. No, so I wonder how we walk this out more broadly to a larger community, and how you're doing that through your RCN, Heather. And of course, we have MBON and Marine Life 2030 that are platforms that are available to you both to do any of this.
So I know that that's been, when we were initially, we were approached by NSF EarthCube to start working on this for time series. And I think their intent was, you know, focusing on some of the NSF funded US based time series. And my initial response, and I've stayed consistent in this message all along, was that there's no point in doing this if it's not a global effort. It's a waste of time. And so we have from the very beginning had international collaborators, both on our steering committee, our leadership committee, and in our working group, and have every intention of making sure that all of the activities of the RCN will be international, just like that workshop we did on methods 10 years ago. That's the base of the community for the METS RCN. I mean, that's how we started this network of time series. And so that's the group of people that I'm targeting. Those are the folks that I want at these meetings. All of the efforts that we're engaged in need to be international, and the tools that I've been using really have been more community building, workshops and small group working groups that are really targeted and focused on specific, whether they be sets of variables or specific goals. It's really important to make sure that people are on the same page and have the same goals. And so I really want to hold the same workshop I held 10 years ago. I want to have those time series back to the table and then some. And I want to have people from all of these partner networks who are going through this similar process, we can work together, and we can learn from what's already been done through ESIP and through MBON, really kind of galvanize this network. And it's meant to be international. And I've had to push this point with our funders, but it's been a really much more rewarding experience in it being. So my answer, that was a very long answer, but really, I really want to have that workshop 10 years later. I want to have the same workshop, but focus it on data, fair data, best practices. That will be the focus of that. And we have a data working group that, they're working hard, but it's volunteer work. So it takes time, right? And we can learn from, I'm going to ESIP meetings whenever I can, and I'm going to other EarthCube groups, trying to figure out how they built consensus and did the kind of work that they're doing in their networks. I'm just trying to learn, because I am not an informatics person. I'm not a data scientist. I'm an ocean scientist, so I've a lot to learn.
Yeah, and I guess since I think you asked me too, the one thing I would add is that I think what gets hard is the time when you meet. So I have an OBPS group where I meet in the morning for me and in the late afternoon, so that you can get international participation. But that's kind of hard. And ESIP is based in the US, so it does kind of have a US focus to it. But we do have people who are connected in, who are at least on the mailing list, that are international. But yeah, building that international participation is difficult across time zones. So.
Yeah, that time series that time zone issue is tough. We have, just to pull our leadership team together for the RCN is an enormous challenge. We're meeting we've got people in Australia and New Zealand, we've got people in Germany. I mean, it's really a challenge to do, but we do it, and I'm willing to get up at 5 a.m. or meet at 1 a.m., whatever it takes. But also, as we move forward with these, I think COVID has shown us that we can do a lot online, to build community. And we can try to be there in person when we can, but we can also have hybrid meetings. We can really broaden this effort. And I know that our program, OCB, has benefited enormously from developing this online piece. And it, especially for global community building, it has been amazing. But I envision that this next, decade later data best practices workshop will take place. I would like for it to take place at or near a time series. We had the last one in Bermuda, I am not sure where this next one will be. I don't want it to be cost prohibitive, but there will be an online component to it. That's kind of standard for us now. And that's really helpful for global community building as well. When people can't or don't want to travel, that option is there. So there's been a lot of talk about OBON. So I'm wondering if Pierluigi, would you like to go next and talk a little bit about the Ocean Biomolecular Observing Network? Did I get that right? There are a lot of acronyms on this.
You did. I think my intervention would be best on ODIS, so the Ocean Data Information System, right?
Great.
But OBON is also relevant for omics. I wonder, Raisa, would you like to step in there and cover OBON so it's not just me talking?
Yeah, sure. I can go ahead and do that. So I'm together with Pierluigi. I'm co-leading the data strategy of OBON, the Ocean Biomolecular Observing Network, which is a program under the UN Ocean Decade for Sustainable Development that Frank already introduced with Marine Life 2030 and everything. So there are a lot of different programs, some under Digital Twins, then Marine Life 2030, and OBON really focus on biomolecular observing. So looking at DNA sequences, proteins, metabolites to understand biodiversity and how that is changing. And yeah, I think in relation to the focus of this session on really getting the data in order, one of our approaches there is very much linked to what Pierre, I think, will explain or introduce later on, which is the Ocean Data Information System, ODIS. And I'm only very briefly touching on that now to say that it's using the same principles in that we're trying to use standards that are already used. For example, W3C standards from the World Wide Web Consortium, linked open data standards, making sure that we're reusing as much as possible and at the same time, making sure, well, we have these standards that are oftentimes very disjoint from what scientists are doing in the field. Like nobody really knows from the people that I work with, nobody really knows JSON LD. And they're like, wait, how do I do that? I know that you're saying, oh, a data package in JSON LD would be great to have to make sure that we can discover your data. So really making sure that we keep the reality of the scientists in the field and the data management on that side as easy as possible, with using some of the standards that are maybe a bit closer to what they know, with what was already mentioned with the ESIP primer, so Darwin Core for biodiversity data, for biodiversity metadata, the Genomic Standards Consortium's standard or checklist for the minimum information about any sequence, the mixed standard, which is also on the primer. And then translating that into data packages that can very easily be exchanged. So I think that is part of the core strategy on the data side within OBON, that we're using the standards that we have, that we also contribute to the maturation of those standards. For example, we've only just gotten endorsed a memorandum of understanding between TEDWIG and the Genomic Standards Consortium, so the two main standards agencies in this space, to work together and to have a mapping between the standards, so that using one standard, which of course is already a lot of effort in itself, doesn't silo your data away from another. I know that on the primer paper, it is also mentioned that some of the major repositories use one or the other standard. And that is very much also the case with Mixes and Darwin Core. So we're really working towards making it easier on the user side, maturing the standards, and then also maturing our data practices so that we're not only looking within omics and biomolecular, but connecting to the wider ocean data space. And for that, we're really trying to use the formats and serializations that are being used overall. Yeah, I don't know, Pierre, if there's anything else that
Thanks.
you'd like to
Thanks. I think
add.
that's really a good overview, and especially the way that our data strategy in OBON nests within the larger data strategies that will be working in the UN Ocean Decade, but also in other systems that are global, that are bringing together national data centers and others. And we're just trying to secure and define the omics bit of that. So biomolecular omics bit of each one of these specifications. And I could imagine for METS-RCN, so many of your time series are biomolecular or biomolecular enabled, at least hotspots, others, right? So what we can offer is that, all right, we have a international consortium getting together and defining, okay, we're going to talk this language for at least a while, right? And that gives the developers in each one of these different independent, globally distributed time series a stable set of specifications to develop to, right? And that's really what we need, so then we can build technology on top of that. And that's what we're doing then with Ocean Info Hub, Otis, and other systems that are now then going to be part of the let's say core digital exchange architecture for the UN Decade, but also hopefully then for further things, you know, and that will feed into digital twins, etc. So OBON, you know, we found our niche there and said, okay, that's happening. We don't want to create a parallel structure that we have to map yet again. Let's co-develop with them right inside those specifications and say, hey, the expertise for biomolecular and omic data are here. Let us drive that bit, right? And, you know, of course, it's all co-development, right, in the decade. So we haven't had a no yet. And we had our steering committee a couple of weeks ago for OBON, and we're inviting all of our projects or others who have omic data to come join our data team, send your data people to us, and we'll make sure that it works for you. So yeah, that's OBON. I can continue with ODIS since we're kind of on the topic, Heather, if you wish. Right. Okay, so ODIS, that started in 2018, actually. It was a proposal put in by IODE, so the International Oceanographic Data and Information Exchange, which is the data wing of IOC UNESCO. And the idea was to say, all right, we don't need to build another big database, but we need to help facilitate different partners around the world who already have very impressive resources. We need to help them talk to each other, right? And we also don't want to come up with a brand new specification that no one's ever seen before. So as Raisa mentioned, and also as others, we have to use the way that the web already works and just try to stabilize an oceanographic sub-web of that, right? So that's what we did. We approached this. We contracted some very talented developers. So Jeff is here, Doug is here too, Doug Phils. There they are. And we tried to leverage work that was already out there. So Abby and others mentioned ESIP. So there was a cluster there, the science on schema.org. And schema.org is this language that's used by Google Dataset Search, Yandex, although it's not so popular anymore, and some of the other major search providers to find stuff, right? They said, okay, we need a way to structure information on the web. Let's set up this very loose, kind of flexible standard called schema.org. And that's a semantic thing. And then you can put those semantics of those terms in schema.org that says, what is a data set? What is a person? What is a whatever, right? What is an event? Very relaxed semantics. And you can just put that into one of the web formats, as Raisa mentioned, JSON-LD, for example, which any developer you hire around the world will, if they're a web developer, they know a thing or two about JSON-LD, right? It's not some sort of ambiguous scientific standard that you have to read a paper about. You can hire somebody out of the employment pool and do it. So, you know, we did this and we've been developing exchange standards. Our grant, actually, we got a grant from the government of Flanders, Kingdom of Belgium to do this, still in operation. And our objective was to connect two partners and exchange about 1,000 data sets to show a proof of principle that this works. We now have about more than 50 partners, and we're exchanging currently about 500,000 data sets. Soon we're plugging into World Ocean Database, so that's 18 million more coming in, and some of the regional providers like EMODNet, the Australian National Data Center, RDA, Research Data Australia, and a few others are queuing up to then plug in, so millions more data sets will come. And the reason that we were able to scale so much, even though we only aimed for such a small thing, is because it naturally scales. It's just how the web works, right? So if I may, I'm just going to share my screen very briefly. So we look at like our portal. So we have a test portal that we have over here. This is just a test thing that we have connected to our knowledge graph. So all of our partners, those 50 partners, they share little snippets of metadata about the data that we have. We don't hold any of their data. We just hold their metadata that says, I have stuff about whales or bathymetry or experts or documents. These can be best practice documents or methodological documents, projects, spatial data, etc. And so if you query in this, and I like to do the turtles one, say like, where are the turtles? It'll pull up in this test example, some data sets, etc., and also some spatial data, any spatial data that people have shared about where the turtles are. And you can like zoom into any one of those. And again, this website is driven by the metadata shared by the partners. We don't hold any of this. So if we go into one of those regions where the turtles are, it'll link you back to the original source, in this case, OBPS. So if your data was in OBPS, OIH will automatically pick it up because OBPS has connected. It just depends on whether or not your data and metadata are in a form that can be understood, right? If they're well structured, etc. So what we propose then to do work, so to say, and connect to the METS RCM, we can create a pattern, a so-called pattern, that we use to define how to share that data. We have one for essential ocean variables, for data sets, for people, for maps, etc. And it's just schema.org. This is a template that you give to your developers and say, hey, the metadata that you have in your databases or whatever you have, you can share it like this. And if you share it like this, we can understand it. And there's the semantics built in. So there are some ontologies in there, GCMD, ENVO. There's some NOC terms in there to say what kind of apparatus did you use to actually collect the data. So there's your NERC vocabs to say we collected the sea state essential ocean variable using this. And basically it's your provenance track. So we did it, we've tested it, it works, but what we don't have is a specification for how to represent a time series itself. So I think that's where the METS RCM, again, once they're out there, then we have all of these partners in the world sharing data in this way that's feeding into solutions like Ocean Info Hub. So we can find more information about pretty much anything, right? It's not really bounded, just whoever you want to share. So like if BATS, HOTS, or whoever else is in the METS RCM said, hey, we have these data sets, we have those training opportunities, we have these time series, we can go. We took a little look about what we would do. And schema.org does have this concept of event series, which can very much easily become a time series, to say that it's a series of events, sampling events, or whatever you have. Each one of those has an event profile in schema.org. It says who did it, where, what data was produced by it. And then we can actually integrate that and give your developers something then to develop into. So yeah, that's it, Ocean Info Hub. And I'll, Doug and Jeff, do you have any thoughts? I mean, I know that we have a lot of demands on your time, but do you think like we can create something of this kind, like an event series, that a pattern for event series? These are our patterns that we have. People want funders. We've been working with some marine protected areas also. And what it starts with is that the scientists tell us, or the scientists or the experts, in this case, this is an NGO, they tell us what the metadata that's important to them is. Like, this is what's important to us. And then we figure out how to actually implement that in a schema.org pattern, and we give that back to the community. So we're happy to do that. Again, if most of you are marine scientists, you have the expertise to tell us what to put in there. And then we can then elevate it, test it, make sure it works, and then add it into the Exchange solution. As a kind of side note on that, everything inside the Ocean Best Practices system is also in here. So it's inside our documents pattern. So OBPS is already plugged in to OIH via Otis. It shares the data directly. So again, you don't have to do any extra work, and we federate stuff all around. So that's enough, I think. But it's just an opportunity. It's on the table for you. And I can't seem to stop sharing my screen. So Heather, I don't know, as host, could you stop my screen sharing? Because I don't see, it doesn't seem like I can. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you so much to both of you for that really fantastic overview. I can tell you that we're hoping to get together with you, Pierre, and maybe Justin and Adam and Danny to talk about establishing an Ocean Time Series presence in Ocean Info Hub. I think that would be a really great step towards making these data more interoperable. And I know that we've had these preliminary little small group meetings of, focusing on subparameter sets and trying to identify what those what is the minimum set of metadata information that should be included in that kind of a framework. So I'm hopeful that we can move forward on that. Do others have questions about this? Or I put a link in the chat here to the notes, and I hope that you will all add your name to the document as participants, because we'd love to stay connected. We want to know why you're here. There are things that you can share with us that we don't know. So please do speak up, participate, ask questions. Frank, you have a question? Go right ahead.
Yeah, I have a question, Pierluigi and Heather. So the people that do operational observing many times call this monitoring, and it's in many cases is a time series. Now that they have very important biological time series, and many agencies around the world do that. And so I wonder if when you think about the vocabulary, that time series also includes those monitoring programs. And we've never been able to. I think it's changing, that the word monitoring is not such a bad word in the scientific community, which is kind of unfortunate. But I think it's changing, and so I think we do need to do monitoring, and it is a time series.
Yeah, sure. I remember like publishing not too long ago, 2019 or so, sort of a perspective piece, and I was told by reviewers, don't say monitoring, that's not science, right? Because it has to be innovation, etc. But if you want to ask big questions, you need to monitor, you need to have a baseline, you need to talk about planetary dynamics. So if you want to do big science, yeah, you need some monitoring in there. Of course, this means collaboration with the operational networks. I think that's what spooks people, but that's exactly what the decade's trying to sort of sort out here. Okay, so I put in a little thing in the chat. We have an issue tracker for that. Jeff, do you think we can set up a thing? So if anyone here has data people, I know Nico, you were involved, others, we can set up an issue there just to start defining this pattern, get the work done, right? And then test, with whoever's able to do some testing, any of the time series that are ready and have some capacity to do so. Maybe as a decade action, you can totally register as that, or just doing it, right? And Jeff has some time to then support. Jeff, is that something you can carry?
Yep, that sounds good. Great.
Thank you. And just, we're connecting with a bunch of partners. I think CEUS is one that we've been working with too. So the Canadian Integrated Ocean Observing System. And it was really cool to meet their developer teams across all of Canada and say, this makes sense to us. And they're already pretty much doing like 80% of this because that's how the web works, right? So we see this time and time again with our partners in Latin America, Africa, Pacific Island developing states, it's everywhere. So we're very happy to then mobilize this and make a splash.
Great.
Thank you so much. Who do I have next in this lineup? To go back. Why don't we move to BICO Demo? That's the Biological and Chemical Oceanography Data Management Office, which is based here at Woods Hole Oceanographic, but is nationally facing. Danny, would you like to, do you want to screen share, or are you just going to speak?
I'm just going to speak. I didn't make any slides. I think that everyone can, you guys can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I think maybe I would start with just a little history about BICO Demo and how we kind of came to collaborate with Heather on the METS RCN. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Biological and Chemical Oceanography Data Management Office, we've been here at WHOI since approximately 2006 or so. We are primarily funded by the National Science Foundation. We do get some other private funding to manage, curate, and publish oceanographic ecological data. So a wide heterogeneous gamut of parameters and observations. We've done this from the moment that we were started was sort of an arranged marriage due to some long decadal scale National Science Foundation projects and then the repository was so wildly successful, it just kept going and building. We do have several time series, primarily as Heather alluded to, they're the US National Science Foundation assets and awardees. And some of those are very long-standing. And we have the well-known HAW and BATS data, Cariaco. We continue to steward all of these, even the ones that have sunsetted like Cariaco. We have some local, more regional ones, the Narragansett time series here. We also have the San Pedro time series. So a lot of these observations, some of them are dating back from the 50s. They all have had their own methodologies. They all have had their local practices and operations. And so the challenge here, I think, for this group is really going to be getting at that pattern for what everybody can agree on to be a minimum time series graph or a minimum time series model. Bless you, Heather. So that's really our involvement here. But from the repository standpoint, BeacoDemo has already been on a lot of the cutting edge practices and technologies that even Pierre and previous people have discussed. So, we employ WC3 standards, and we are leading in, actually our technical director, Adam Shepard, was also a co-lead for the science and schema group at ESIP that Pierre described. So we're already sort of primed and ready to do this work with Ocean Info Hub. And I think really this is where this group is really going to, find its most valuable activity is going to be in this connection here, because that'll allow the assets that BeacoDemo curates to be able to be interoperable on this larger global scale with all of these other efforts that have been described for the IOD and the Ocean Decade. And so we're sort of ready to do this. I think the data group for the METS RCN is ready to meet, and really we need the input from science on that minimum amount of important information and what's methodologically connected to how we describe these parameters and these observations. So BeacoDemo also uses a number of existing vocabularies to describe our very heterogeneous data holdings. So we're in the process of creating our own ontology, which is an application ontology built on a number of already well-known, governed, and established vocabularies out there. So we feel for the time series content that we curate, we're in a really good space to make it interoperable and to collaborate on these broader global initiatives to enable that. I think from the standpoint of the nitty gritty, I can tell you a little bit about how we operate. One of the most important tenets for us as a repository is to work really closely with each individual PI, and in this case, time series, to help them curate and clean and describe very well descriptive metadata for each time series project. So the onus of doing a lot of this interoperability can be absorbed by the repository, by us, the repository, and it relieves the projects, the individual shoestring projects, that are really on these tight budgets, to not have to develop a lot of internal capacity. And so one of our big tenets is sort of hand-holding through that gross quality control, that observational metadata, the project metadata, really making them discoverable and reusable. And so we do that with our cadre of very well-trained, very knowledgeable data managers in-house. And so we publish all that data out there, but it's all tagged semantically and it's all ready to go to be pulled into these broader efforts. So I think, BeacoDemo is a natural fit. We're excited to work in this space, and we just need the science input here. Let's see. Do you think does anybody, I guess if anybody has any questions, I mean, I could always keep talking, but I can also put I'm sure most of the national people here are familiar with us, at least at least who we are. I can put our link if nobody's put it in there yet.
Danny, that's a question. So that ontology, its interoperability is with other ontologies is based on what? Like, what's the upper level?
Oh, that's a great question, Pierre. You'd have to have Adam tell you that.
All right, I can ask Adam because I think, yeah, okay, it's something to know
So,
because
actually, you could also ask Kai. Kai put it together for us.
oh, Kai developed it. Okay, then
Yeah.
it's probably Obo Foundry linked. Okay.
It is Obo Foundry, actually. Now that you're saying that, it is
Great.
Obo Foundry.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So one of the things with like semantics, right? You know, using a vocabulary is a good idea. It stabilizes, you know, it lets people know that you mean something, but that doesn't guarantee that it's interoperable with other vocabularies automatically, right? There has to be some work. So this is why I asked that question to Danny, because I think one of the things we're trying to be careful about is that those people are making a deliberate choice when they're choosing what semantic solution they want, because there's costs and benefits. We remain neutral in OIH. You can use whatever you want to. We give recommendations about what we know works in certain scenarios, but of course we don't want to stifle innovation.
Sure, and we've tried to keep our application ontology really constrained within Obo Foundry to, you know, a very, very select number.
Thank you, Danny. That's really helpful. Do I have any raised hands here? Okay. What do we have left? We have Marine Life 2030 and we have Goose Bioeco. Why don't we go to Goose Bioeco? I'm not sure if Gabrielle or Frank or both of you would like to share.
Sure, I'll start and then Frank can amplify. And you briefly mentioned the panel earlier, Heather, in your remarks. So you mentioned the essential ocean variables, and I pasted a link to a table in the chat so people can reference what those are. But the Biology and Ecosystem, or BioEco panel, is one of 3 expert panels of the Global Ocean Observing System that's helping coordinate ocean observations, and that includes defining and supporting data collection approaches for the EOVs. The other 2 panels, which BioEco does work closely with, are focused on physics and climate and biogeochemistry. So in that table, you'll see the full list of variables across the different disciplines. So the EOVs for BioEco were identified through a pretty extensive review of societal needs and kind of reporting requirements in the context of a number of international conventions, multilateral agreements with components of marine life in them. And the review also looked at how feasible level of impact, how scalable the variables would be, and sort of from that analysis derived the list that you see in that table. And so the EOVs for BioEco represent functional groups as well as biogenic habitats. And the way the panel is structured is that we have really an expert champion for each, or 2 if possible, for each of the EOVs. And those, so there's kind of ongoing work on any number of those variables at any time. So the groups are developing specification sheets and implementation plans for kind of community guidance for approaching each EOV. And that happens through community engagement activities like workshops, where there is, convening of experts to talk about data sources for the EOV, look at methods for data collection, and plan steps towards kind of global common approaches to monitoring, mapping, data sharing for them. So that's just a general comment about how the EOVs are developed, and that the data management piece is very important in the context of any of these. I did want to flag, I'm going to put a couple links in the chat. So Goose BioEco works really closely with not just MBON and the Marine Life 2030 program, but also with OBIS. And so I did think this group should see the BioEco portal that launched this summer as a place to start coordinating and sort of being able to visualize where we have observations for biology and ecosystem variables, where there might be gaps, et cetera. So this is very early stages of development still, I would say, but it's certainly important for the group to be aware. And I'm just thinking, so I'm thinking about how to, you know, we share a lot of the priorities that we've already talked about, which is really, you know, a focus on convening these kinds of conversations around, you know, towards a shared understanding of what are those standards for biology and ecosystem data that that exist and that are being widely used by the community, and there are some. Also, what are those common data repositories, and how can we advance a set of approaches to ensure that the data that we're sharing via any of these repositories are interoperable, can be integrated together to start to give us that more holistic view of the status of these resources. So that's been a priority, I think, of, you know, Goose BioEco coming together with OBIS and MBON and a whole host of other partners on the data questions. And it's one reason, I think, for our enthusiasm to engage with you and to really learn what that means, like what are the best ways for us to engage with you. So I think there's pretty deep expertise in the panel. That can be worth tapping into, as, you know, once we kind of understand what your preferences or routines are for doing that kind of thing. But I think it would be good for Frank, who is one of the expert leads. But there's Pierluigi is here. I don't know if Ward is here. There are certainly others on this call who are very engaged in BioEco, and I would want them to fill in any gaps that I left.
Thanks, Gabby. I think that was very comprehensive. Just to show that we're synced, you know, with OIH and others. Ward, myself, Peter Provost, who does most of the coding for OBIS, we're making sure that those resources are synced. And one of the things that's relevant to the time series is that a lot of data is sort of incidentally essential ocean variable data, right? It's like you happen to measure some microbial diversity, you have a data set just sort of hanging out, and you share it, right? That's cool, that's valuable. But Goose does have those specification sheets, right? And one thing that we're not able to detect very well in our data systems is if the provider intended to share EOV data or just happens to share data that's about an EOV, you know, sort of passively. So that's what we have as a pattern inside the OIH and OTIS, which then in OBIS is something that we can get. If the time series share, the people sharing data into OTIS or their own data portal or whatever it happens to be, if they use that pattern, it lets our systems detect we really meant to share this as an EOV, as opposed to this is some microbial diversity we happen to measure, right? So that's one thing. I'll put the link into that pattern there for your tech people. And I think that's actually quite important in terms of this transformation of science during the UN decade, right? We're very happy as scientists if we just find any data on something, right? But we're going into a world where like stakeholders are going to need, all right, we need to know that this met certain criteria in order to use it for a dashboard or for a policy consultation or something, right? So the more that we can show the intentionality and the provenance of that data using the metadata, that's what we're trying to do here, the better it will be. And the EOV panel, together with OIH and OTIS and OBIS as the hub of the biodiversity stuff for that, we're trying to stabilize that to make sure that whatever is being put into Darwin Core, shared through the system, is done in a way that other systems can react to it and therefore interoperate. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, that's the EOV pattern. Again, that's mostly for your tech people, but and again, it just shows we're being a little bit more thorough with that data to really say that this is a Goose product, or this is intended for consumption by Goose or Goose alliances.
If I can complement that, as you see, there's a few of us that seem to be everywhere. Pierre Luigi is one, and I show up here at NEMBON and Marine Life 2030, and then the Goose BioEco panel. And I don't think that this is not a coincidence. I think that we're very dedicated as volunteers to advance things, and so we get engaged because we believe that the only way to get the community moving in one direction is to talk the same language. And this essential ocean variable is one example of I mean, we can call it zooplankton, or we can call it phytoplankton, or we can call it turtles. But the idea of the EOVs is to put some order in the house, that people can follow some or find information about how you measure one thing or another, and that we talk the language that people in the ocean physics and the biogeochemistry are also talking, so that we can integrate biology into the larger ocean observing systems. And so that's the goal, no? And that has a purpose. I mean, what is it useful for? So these EOVs are not just biology variables, they're a whole set of multidisciplinary variables. It is so important that it now has been adopted, these biological essential ocean variables, along with the physics and biogeochemistry. Some of them are now, but just this week, announced that they're included in the global climate observing system as essential climate variables. And so this is really important, that biological variables like phytoplankton concentration and diversity are now considered an essential climate variable, just like temperature or wind maybe. And I'll find the new GCOS report on ECVs and I'll paste it in the chat. But I think the message here is volunteer, get engaged, you know, try to promote this language so that we can all move in the same direction.
Thank you, Frank and Pierre, for helping or providing those points. I think getting us all moving in the same direction means we need to keep this conversation going as we're pushing forward. And each little baby step that we make, it's a community step. It's not just for one network, it affects everybody. So we keep sharing our baby steps, and I think that's going to make all the difference. We have, unfortunately, Ward Appletons could not be here today to talk about OBIS, but I feel like OBIS has been well covered by all of the other people here just because of the connectivity that already exists. So I'm glad about that.
Yeah, to interject, Heather, on that, you know, so we were very clear when developing OIH and ODIS that OBIS already is a hub concentrating a lot of biodiversity data. It would be kind of nuts to not do that, to use that. So we said, okay, it is also an IODE resource. So again, we're concentrating the development there. Same thing with OBON, right? To try to get the omic specifications translated into Darwin Core too, so that OBIS can leverage that and we stabilize that practice. So yeah, that's important because it's something we keep coming back to. The technology part is not hard. The technology part is just pretty standard, right? It's this social agreement that we have. You know, scientists tend to be innovators. They want to do something new, something that has never been done before. But this is like pretty dangerous for trying to engineering stable, sustainable systems, right? So we need a little kind of recalibration of that relationship. And what we're trying to do on the IODE side is also find out what will be sustained, right? So we know that these things will be sustained. We can try to make them distributed. We can try to make them as inclusive as possible by using many entry points. So you don't have to use OBIS to be part of OIH. You can share your own data, but you're sharing it in a way that OBIS can also harvest in case it wants to help people who are using OBIS discover something not hosted in OBIS. And then we have this data democratization pattern, which is going to be very important quite soon because, as you know, the US, the EU, other major regional governments or governing authorities, there will soon be more data sovereignty regulations from the governmental level, which is very likely to also impact how we share information scientifically. To say that a nation will want to say, no, this is our data, it has certain licenses for usage. By prepping things to be distributed with hubs that can connect, we protect ourselves from just losing data because some central database has to block it or delete it or something like that. So we're also keeping an eye on that and some of the high-level conversations we have with some government representatives and others who are talking about the future of the internet, particularly in a time of war, as we're in, and this is going to have impacts on how data is shared through sovereign systems. So we have an eye on that too, and I think it will affect us eventually.
Hey, Heather, I wonder if I might speak to OBIS just briefly.
That'd be great.
Okay, yeah, so I think it's worth mentioning, OBIS has been mentioned a lot, which is great to hear, really exciting. And I think what kind of makes OBIS different from other systems that may be talked about is that it does use Darwin Core, and what Darwin Core allows for is integration of data sets together. So it's not a data set by data set portal. You can go in and search by species or by a geographic area, and you're going to be able to get out the records just from that area or just for that species from across multiple data sets. And so that's kind of what makes OBIS a little bit different. And so it's really great to hear involved in all these projects, and it definitely has an international component. I was actually in Belgium last week for meeting together with the nodes, and there are nodes all across globally. So definitely places to get involved. Yiming is on the call today. She's with the polar, the Antarctic OBIS node. So yeah, lots of ways to get involved. Definitely a global community. I think that's probably what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Abby. So I think Emmett is not on the call. Frank, do you want us, I don't see Emmett Duffy. If he is here, please correct me. But Frank, would you like to just say a few words about Marine Life 2030? I know you've mentioned it briefly here and there, but as an ocean decade
I think
activity.
that, I mentioned it before, but Marine Life 2030 is sort of the response of MBON to the Ocean Decade. It's a platform to increase the visibility of what we're doing. We're partnering with the Ocean Biomolecular Observing Network and others to try to reach that visibility. The decade is it's just a big megaphone for what we're trying to do. And I encourage all of you to get engaged as volunteers. At the moment, there's no funding for anything that we do with the decade. So it is a volunteer effort, but it is very visible. And so I think that the kind of messages that we're trying to promote here can be channeled through the decade. I mean, there are formal ways to do that. You can write a proposal to get endorsed by the decade to be a project. We can do that, but it's a bit cumbersome. Although I think that if you want to use the logo or some formality to this, then the decade requires that. I'm not sure that there's a lot more to say other than that.
Thanks, Frank. I would love to we only have 30 more minutes left together, and I would love to use this time to engage all of the people who've joined us today and haven't had a chance to speak yet. If you have questions or you have knowledge that you want to share about ongoing efforts that we should know about, I really want this opportunity, and I would love for any of our METS RCN partners and leadership team, if they want to speak up. I see Nico is here, and that he is leading the EuroSea project that I talked about earlier, and has been the best use case for what we've been trying to enable through the data efforts of the RCN. I think Nico is probably the in the trenches champion for a lot of the work that's been done so far. So Nico, do you want to say a few words?
Well, I can, sure. Hi, everybody. First off, thanks, Heather, for the opportunity. Well, I actually made quite a bit of progress the last months with the time series product. So I'm really happy that it's moving forward. And I do plan to try to invite all the time series participants, so the PIs of the 12 sites which are participating right now, for another meeting by the end of this year. So maybe as a plan for you guys that you know what I'm up to, I hope to have a pilot product out by the beginning of next year. And I do see that I have the different sites merged now. I have them on the same units. I have applied a common vocabulary using existing ones, obviously. I have mapped it to existing NERC vocabularies. And I think the most important step now was that I finalized analyzing the metadata, which I have been given, so that I have checked what methodologies are applied presently at the different sites with the Bermuda workshop recommendations. And based by comparing these informations, I have been able to create a flagging scheme, and which at least gives a qualitatively approach to the data, so that the future users can get an idea of how comparable the different data from the different sites are. I am also trying to get a quantitative measure for that using precision and accuracy values, which have been given to me in our metadata forms we have handed out. That is a bit more tricky. Probably only the hot time series data set will have true quantitative value assigned to some of their parameters. But this also shows, I mean, it's a pilot product, so it shows the shortcomings, which steps we still need to make in order to have a truly comparable data set. But all of these things I actually just said now, I still have to discuss with all the participating sites, whether they agree with what we have now worked out and what we propose. And again, I hope that by the end of this year, I can have this meeting. It's going to be virtual because they're all spread around the world, and it's going to be a pain to find a good time. As Heather has already mentioned, there are people from Japan, from New Zealand, from Europe, from US. Actually, it's not really possible to find a time which suits everybody. But I hope that they will agree with what we proposed, and that by the beginning of next year, the pilot is at least out, and then a paper will also be written, and trying to explain the shortcomings and what steps ahead we need to take in order to make it a sustainable product. And then we'll see how the user group will accept our pilot, and then we get probably more feedback and we can move further on and so far.
Thanks, Nico. I have a question about, like, when you release this pilot data product, is this something that you envision updating every however many years, or will this be, I can imagine, you know, the initial effort to pull this together is enormous, but updating it thereafter once you have protocols in place might be feasible, or
I hope so. I hope so, at least on the small scale we're working on right now. So for example, the quantitative descriptions of the variables might still lack information also in the future, but on the scale we're now, I hope that I can update it at least every 2 years or so. But that has also to be discussed with the participating sites, how frequent we want to update it. But I definitely want to pursue on this route and make it really a sustainable product. And yeah, again, the pilot is just the very first step. And I've also talked to Luigi about making it machine readable in easy words. And we haven't really continued on that because from my side, I still lacked the data, so to say. but I'm planning to get in touch with him once I really have the okay from the participating sites to also move on that. And maybe that also then makes it more sustainable in the long run, I hope.
Yeah, I remember that conversation we had, Nico, some months ago now. But we're ready now. So that issue that we just dropped in on GitHub, that would be the place, right? Because if we have those data sets or some examples, you can anonymize it if you wish. We can make sure that whatever we're developing in terms of the exchange standard matches those. Because one thing that Doug had to hop off to another meeting, but one thing that Doug also does is he writes validators for all of the material being shared across this knowledge graph, right? So it's a way to check that, hey, everything's being shared as expected so that the systems don't get confused, so we proactively identify any non-standard way of sharing information. So we have that. So yeah, please chime in or just drop your GitHub handle. Jeff and myself will help you stay in touch. And I think that would be the contact point, right, Heather? Like primarily, because Nico seems to be the integration point for the data.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because then we'll make sure that like those examples we gather, at least we can cover as much of them as we can with this Otis arc pattern, which then will feed back into science-on-schema.org, ESIP, etc. So we basically multiply the effort through an oceanographic application system, but it's usable by all of the other interests represented here.
That's also what I'm really hoping for. And I have initially thought that I could reach out to you by September again. Due to some summer break issues, I just had to extend it a bit. And I hope really by the end of this year that the corporation is gonna.
Yeah, but please use the issue. I mean, like, trying to pin me down is a small piece of hell, as many people know. So please use that issue tracker, because like Jeff then has funded time to specifically look at that and make sure that our communities are linked up, and then he'll call me in with his red phone that he can pick up to call me when he needs to.
Great.
Nico, can you just give people a sense, just because there's a whole mix of people on the call here, like what are the parameters that you're focusing on? I mean, I know this, but I
didn't do an introduction.
And also, like, what is the global extent of the time series representation, who the people participating in the product?
Sure. So presently we have 12 time series participating. We have 2 from Japan. We have 1 in New Zealand. We have HOT, so the one from Hawaii, that is the biggest one apparently. And then we have Kariako, where Frank is also present here. And then we have 1 in the Mediterranean Sea that's called Differmet. And we have in the North Atlantic 3 time series stations. And then we have the Cape Verde time series station in the Eastern Atlantic, tropical Atlantic. And all of these sites have quite a long established history of sampling. Kayak, for example, has already stopped now, but many of the other ones are actually ongoing. All of these, well, not all of these, but most of these are deep stations. We have 1 in the Mediterranean Sea and in the north coast of Spain, which is already only 80 meter deep. But the other ones are almost all deeper than 1,000 meters. And we focus on inorganic carbon relevant parameters. Well, not only inorganic carbon relevant parameters, but all BGC EUVs presently. So this includes nutrients, then of course inorganic carbon parameters, but it also includes oxygen. And yeah, we try again to just for now synthesize the data from these different sites, provide a one-stop shop for the different users, and at least give some sort of measure to the users on how comparable the different data are. And that's where the different metadata flags come into play.
Thank you so much.
I think the oldest one is HOT, pretty sure. Yeah, I think the oldest one is HOT.
Yeah, I think that's the longest.
Quite a long time.
Great. I see that Natalia, you have talked about IMOS. I'd love to hear if you're still here, if you want to just speak up and talk a little bit about this.
Hi, I am. It's just a bit late here, so I'm wearing my dressing gown. So pardon me. I am in bed. but so I was typing, but no, yeah. So I'm the science officer for IMOS, and I thought that it would be nice to drop to you all some links to show where we're at within the BioTime series, and that is pretty much our national reference stations. So they are moorings, they're placed around Australia. So we have 7 of those, and they provide the baseline for all ocean observations, and also they anchor many of the projects that we fund as well. So basically they are mooring with physical, so with a CTG and in an ADCP. But they are also attached to ship-based observations of bioparameters, biogeochemical parameters every month. Well, mostly, some needs to be 3 months, but essentially it's monthly. So it's a great data set. It goes back years, like one of them goes back up to the 70s in Mariah Island. And yeah, it's actually older than that. I think it's 50s, but then it doesn't have all the bioparameters that we have now, because now we include phytoplankton and other things. We might include microplastics next year, which is on trial at the moment. But the thing with the national reference stations is that if you include a measurement in one of them, you need to include in all of them. So we, like every new variable that we want to include needs to be really well planned, so it can be sustained in all the different regions and with the specific logistic challenges. Yeah, so as in ship time, availability, weather window, and so on and so forth. But basically, we do have a very well developed manual that has, I think, 4 versions. They are all on OBPS as well, on how we handle those operations, but also the data stream, data workflows, and we have a steering committee that meets every 3 months, every 4 months. And because of COVID, we got a little bit out of sync because these operations, they go all over Australia. So we have different facility leaders and they couldn't meet. So now we are starting it again and also having our QA QC summits that used to happen once a year. So they're planning our first one after COVID so we can review this manual. But anyway, it's just to give you an idea on how we're doing things here on that space. And I've seen you all talking about products. So we do have products already published with this data set. So there is a time series product that it was funded by the University of New South Wales, but it's hosted on the ODN portal, so everyone can download the data already but bind in hourly time series, but that's for the physics part of the data set. But this year we have also on trial a product that's called the Ocean Observer. So it's going to be a website that is going to compile all this data in a more user-friendly manner. And the bio part is all written in R. And we've seen it recently on our annual planning meeting that Claire Davis presented to us, and it's looking really good. Yeah, it's really looking nice. The physics part, they're still working on it, but it's going to look similar to the product that it's already available for New South Wales. So I guess that's a very quick summary and what's left of my brain at 1:40 a.m. But yeah, I'm keen to maybe pop this in on that document maybe tomorrow, or if this is enough, or I'm happy to take any questions. I'm awake up anyway.
Thank you, Natalia. Can we have you attend if we have I mean, you have a sustained time series effort here that's pretty impressive. If you would be interested in participating, if we were to have a workshop like this next year, that was focused on data and data best practices. It sounds like you have a lot of insights to bear through your data product development.
Oh yeah, no, it would be great. It would be great. It could also, I mean, we have all the people that are involved in this efforts are much more time than I am, and the actual researchers that wrote the manual probably can speak to much more property on how they have developed the protocols. But also Paul Van Roof is that is my manager, is heavily involved with the OBPS. So we would love to be part of this, because it's our desire that things become more and more standardized, and then we are endorsing the practices for Australia, but in OBPS. But of course, we need the global community to be involved on how the researchers from our facilities are writing those practices so we can endorse. So it's very, it would be great if we got invited, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Natalia, and thank you again for staying awake this late. I really appreciate having you here.
That's okay, thank you so much.
Frank, you
Sorry.
raised your hand. So
Sorry,
Frank,
I look a bit dumb with my dressing gown. It's cold.
hey, I'm wearing sweatpants, just so you all know. That's the beauty of Zoom. And it's 9 a.m. here, or 10 a.m. here. So Frank, you have your hand up first, and then Enrique, go ahead.
Yeah, it's actually closer to 11 a.m. already, so we're close to the end. But I should have probably waited until 2 minutes before the end to bring this up. But Natalia brings up the endorsement process, which I think IMOS has figured out in a very orderly and systematic way. And I think it's a very important process. And I know that you, Heather, have tried to get some commonality working with Nico and others on how do you structure, for example, the biogeochemical data, and who then is the one that says, yeah, this is the way it should be done, and we endorse it this way or another way. So IMOS, of course, has figured that out pretty well, and the rest of us have not. So how, I think that, I know we won't get to that to any extent today, but how do we get to endorsement so that if anybody else wants to use a specific method or a specific data format standard, that they feel, well, another big group is using it and they have it endorsed. I don't know if Natalia wants to comment on that, but it is a challenge.
I strongly encourage anybody. I dropped a link in there, and a few people have dropped a link in the chat here with so there is this ocean best practices repository, and I've seen some people drop links in here to best practices, different discipline best practices, and there is a methods best practices document that I don't know who mentioned it earlier, but maybe it was Frank. But this is an international repository, and it is something we should all be taking advantage of and staying connected with each other's efforts. I also encourage, when you're thinking about your effort, think about it in a broader context. I know for Ocean Time Series, we've long had this US focused subcommittee on Ocean Time Series, and I've kind of moved away from that thinking, and I would love to have something, and we're actually trying to establish something under the Goose Observations Coordination Group, where it's an international coordination body for Ocean Time Series, so that we're all working together as opposed to all of these disparate national activities and efforts. I really think it's important to have kind of a single overarching umbrella for the kinds of work that we're doing. Otherwise, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's wasting time, but it's duplicating a lot of effort that, I really think there's a lot of value in that. So I think organizations like Goose and the Ocean Best Practices are, these types of activities are really important for providing a framework or an umbrella for us all to coordinate underneath. Go ahead, Enrique.
Thank you, Heather. Time flies. Time flies when you're having fun. This passed really quickly, and I really appreciate this conversation. I learned a lot. I think that we benefit greatly from this data synthesis for time series, which are not really widely available. But anyhow, I had a quick question for Nico, and perhaps you said it and I missed it, but I'm wondering if you're also including the time series stations in the Canary Islands, in that corner of the Atlantic.
The SDOC time series.
Okay.
No, we're not. We tried. It doesn't seem like it's working. I
can help making that connection. So if you drop me a line, I can. I mean, it's the reason I'm raising this question is because that's an important corner of the Atlantic, and it's usually a big shadow. So it'd be good to incorporate those too.
Yes, I've actually been in contact with Andres Janka about it.
Okay.
I've also met him personally. The thing is, he wants to first publish the time series data himself under the SDOC umbrella alone, and not under the time series product directly. And since he has no funding at the present, or at least no resources at the present to do it in time for the time series product, we have to skip the SDOC time series data set for now. And I really hope once the time series pilot is out that people who were not convinced yet to be included will be convinced thereafter, and will then for the next update be included.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so, sorry, but thanks for the hint. I know that SDOC is a really important time series station.
Yeah, but this is an important conversation because this is going to keep on going. We need to think about incentives somehow, but that's part of a different conversation.
Yeah, this is a conversation that came up at when we had that small data workshop in Hawaii as part of the OceanOBS meeting. And, how do we incentivize? In many cases, these data collection efforts are very focused on specific science questions, or they're, funded over certain time periods. Their funding is unstable. There's not a lot of money to do this extra work and this extra connectivity. And there's not a ton of incentive to just throw your data out there and let everybody else publish on them and not get any credit for it. So there's this intermediate sort of problem solving step that we really need to broach in order to make sure that these data sets, the people who are collecting these data sets are recognized and acknowledged. Jody, I see that you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Hi, I really wanted to say just a fantastic session. I've gotten so much out of this. Quick introduction. I'm from CSIRO in Australia, part of the Australian Microbiome Initiative. One of our core data sets, which I lead, is actually the IMOS marine microbiome data stream from the national reference stations. We're all about trying to provide fair data to a whole range of stakeholders, and we do try and stick to mixes categories for DNA-based data and vocabularies like ENVO. I was really interested in the information on the Earth Science Information Partners and the vocabs there. I've been madly scribbling away and copying all these links so that I can look into it further. And the EOV part that Pierre brought up, we're always talking about how we collect this microbial data as an EOV, diversity and biomass, but we don't have that specification to make it really clear. So I think that's something that, we need to do straight away, as well as sort of looking at, some of the other things that have come up today. So yeah, I just wanted to say a quick hello and say how much I've valued this session.
I'm really glad to hear that, Jody, and thank you. I'm putting this link in here again just to urge you all, if you haven't yet, please get on the Google Doc and just add your name so we can stay connected with each other. I know they put a little table on here, but I think we need more, it wasn't big enough, which is really great. So please just write your name underneath the table so that we can all stay in contact with one another on this. Pierluigi, go ahead.
Just a brief response to Jody there. So especially with the microbial EOV, part of the reason you haven't been able to align to the specification is because there is no specification yet, right? So I was charged with actually putting that together in 2018 summer or so. And we've been building networks, Omicron, OBON, a whole number of them, which are concerned with observation. However, the microbial groups in particular are still very much research driven. So academia driven, research driven. And we're still having difficulty getting them to operationalize that spec. The time has come though, because now we have those decade programs, those instruments, the ability with the OBPS and others to say, this is a goose endorsed methodology, et cetera. So we have funding actually as part of EuroC to have a workshop on this. And we're planning to do that early next year, right? So if any of you here are interested, we have some funding to help you come over if you don't have your own. And we'll try to do hybrid, of course. And it will be really a workshop to write that specification sheet with high level sort of criteria so that we're not endorsing any one specific method, but we give the criteria against which any regional or national method must be checked in order to then dissatisfy the QA/QC for the EOV spec. And then we can get that into the data system. So yeah, please, well, we're in touch, but if you'd like to be informed about that, do reach out.
Absolutely, definitely. Thanks.
Any final comments in our last 2 minutes together? I want to thank you all for being here. This was such a fantastic conversation, and I want to thank all of our panelists who contributed their knowledge about their networks. Like I said, please get on the Google Doc, add your name and your email so we can stay in contact, and especially about some of these upcoming events that Pierre and others have brought up, and I'm certainly hoping to have something with for an international data best practices meeting. So please do join in. I will find a way, if you have your email, if you've listed your email and name on the Google thing, I will send out a link to the recording for this, if I'm allowed to do that. I think I am. And the notes and the chat, because there's so much, it's like a gold mine in this chat here. And I will try to share all this, compile it all and share it with you. So thank you everyone so much. And enjoy the rest of the Ocean Best Practices workshop. I hope to connect with some of you later in other sessions.
Nice work, Heather.
Thanks, everyone.
Good work.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Heather. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
I think that went well.
Yeah, that was awesome. Everybody was so fantastic.
There's so much information.
I know. It's a little overwhelming, isn't it?
It is.
I can stop recording.